Right, so we've got this lovely landscape here of this one's of Helmsley Castle, and it's just really lovely. You know, you can just do things quite lightly or quite tightly in terms of the style that we use with the watercolor. I mean, if you Google, obviously we're going to, I've brought in some pens, so if we can use what we call line and wash. So some people, you know, call it pen and wash, line and watercolor. Line and wash is just like two opposite things, really. I suppose a typical thing that image it conjures up in your head is a very kind of, you know, light washy watercolor, and you're bringing some of the structure back in with a pen. But it can be a really, really tight, very detailed illustrative type of picture with, you know, more carefully done watercolor, and, you know, quite linear really, and got lots of lines in. So how you do it is entirely up to you. You can go really loose with the pen, or you can go really tight. And I think it's not until you do it you will realize what you like and what you don't like. So if you've not done much line and wash, then it's just a good opportunity to try it out. I've definitely got my tester paper though, because with the colours with the watercolour, when we're kind of mixing it up and everything, it's just quite difficult to see what's happening with the colour, because you can't always tell how it's going to come out. And I'm just going to use a mixture. So I'm going to have a nice big flat brush to do some washes to get the colour on, and then I'll go have a little bit more, you know, one for a bit more detail if I want to go in with the detail, and do that as well. Just pop them to the side. And then I've just got a very ordinary, this one's, excuse me, a uni ball, but any fine liner or any other pen that you've got, probably other than Biro, because Biro doesn't kind of work in the same way. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Oh, right. So you can use absolutely no lines with your pencil, or you can get some detailing if you feel more comfortable with the detail. That's fine. I'm going to I'll do a bit more so you can see it on the screen in case you want to do that, but really I'm going to try and concentrate in putting as much of this in with my brush, shapes of my brush. But as I said, you don't have to do that. So I can just kind of pop in where this wall goes. The reason you wouldn't do it very darkly, obviously, is that you want to be able to rub that out afterwards. So I mean, these are easy to work out how big this wall is, because it takes up quite a big of this area, comes right over halfway there. So it's really nice to get some kind of effects in there. I'll probably pop in whereabouts the castle is. So the castle comes right to the top, doesn't it? I think I've chopped a bit off actually there. And I'm looking, obviously that's halfway. So you can still use your paper as a guide, you know, and think, all right, well, it comes in, that's the tower. I'll move it across a little bit. But you can even just put like little bits of the line in if you don't want it to be really obvious. It's really the bits whereabouts you want to kind of start things. That's why it's helpful. So I might pop some of this in with my brush, but just pop a bit in. So I've got this lovely castle. It's always good to start with like a down wall. And then just the other side of it. And obviously you can see the lean on it just by taking something straight and kind of working out whereabouts the next one comes to. And then we're just working out really in between. So again, you know, if you want to put this in lots of detail, absolutely fine. If you just want to kind of mark out whereabouts the top is, that's fine as well. And then we've got like just the other bit of the castle in there. But I mean, we can really start to look at the just at the angles and everything. If you're not sure whether this is straight across, so just check it. Well, it is, because the grass obviously comes up over there. And then we've obviously got all these little windows. I'm actually might just pop those in myself. If you're not sure, you can just pop a little line in. And again, they follow each other, don't they, in quite a nice mark all the way down. I'm going to make mine quite light though, because I'm quite fancying keeping it a bit more washy today. You know, and then you can see there's like a little bit of a wall edge, you know, a bit of an edge coming out here. And then we've got this ruined side of the castle here, so just going to get that in. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's really lovely to look at. Actually, it's not often we do old ruins like this, or buildings. So the beauty about line and wash is you can get all the different tones of the building in as well, which is quite exciting. Put that one there. I think the one thing as we're going through anyway is to just think about as we're painting it, like the different tones and things like that we've got in. So you might want to pop in some of these foliage. I'm going to pop those on over the top though. So all these trees I'm not going to really bother with. I'm just marking out where the lighter stones are, so I don't go over those really, because I want to keep them light. And obviously with watercolor we're thinking light to dark, you know, darkening out some of these, you know, the gaps as we go, but we want a nice light stonework and everything in first. Again, if you want to make sure you don't go over it, so you can pop in some of your lighter stonework. You want to do that, like marking out a few little things. With me, so I'm going really loose and I'm popping everything in. So I'm just going to get some general shapes. So really, so with pen and wash, you can. Some people do like to put the pen on first and let it bleed into the foliage and things like that. I tend to put my pen over the top because I quite like, you know, an over shadowy finish really. But you can experiment with either. If you're going to do it first, test it out on your paper, putting the ink down first, because you might not like the color that it gives you and everything. So just see how it works. Because you can always let it semi-dry and then try a little bit on as well, but we can do that as we go through. So the only thing what we might say is just to be careful if we're putting like a wash on, like we're obviously getting this kind of background in and everything, just got to be a little bit careful, usually with the sky colors, that we don't have, you know, sometimes you get like sunsets, and if you're not careful you can end up putting colors over red and blue. You can end up with a purple sky, you can end up, especially if you've got like sunsets with the yellow and the blue, you can end up with a green sky, but we're okay with this one, it's really quite plain. So when we're kind of going in, it's fine, because most of these green colors where the foliage goes are quite dark actually. Now I might just make mine much less detailed, much lighter as it comes down, so that I can make sure I get my lighter greens in as well. So I'm just going to keep it really light colored and let it dry first. So we're just making sure that we mix up plenty of paint as well, because obviously one of the things, actually making sure your brushes haven't got any paint in like yellow or anything to start with is a good bet, because sometimes we think, oh gosh, there's a bit left in from last time and now that's going to stain it. So yeah, so deciding on the kind of blue that you want as well. So it's a good idea to just test those blues, because obviously we know that they're all different. Now they're not, unless it's labeled in your kit, you might recognize which is more of a cerulean type turquoisey blue, an ultramarine blue, or you might notice which one's a Prussian blue. We've talked about these before because they give a different color. And if you don't, just test them. We also need to make sure, so I'm just doing that here, that there's plenty of colour mixed up if you're going to do a whole sky. So I'm just going to test that, see if I'm happy with it, because obviously the more water we put, the more translucent it is, and then decide if I want to use any other colours. here. So I'm going to try this one as well. This one's a more cerulean colour. And this is where we can kind of mix, yeah, I'm going to mix these two a bit, see what happens. I'll put a bit more cerulean colour in, or, you know, see what you've got. And then I think what I'm going to actually do is start it like this at the top, so it's a bit darker, and then I'm going to add more water and thin it out till it gets near the base. Now, somebody asked me today, it does happen, like, how do I stop it? Like, if I've done a bit of sky and then I do the next bit, how do I stop it from that getting that overlap mark? Well, the answer is you've just got to work really quickly. And if you can use a nice, the biggest brush you've got as well to keep it moving, that really helps. So all I'm going to do is start adding these colours, start adding this glue at the top behind it, as it is now. And if it's warm, this is where I'm just going to go between that as well. So it's quite nice. A flat brush is quite handy because you can get between these little areas. This is where you need to move quite quickly if it's a dry room, because it will start to make overlap lines. So just keep it moving so that you don't get those, so you can kind of work it over the top, look. And then I'm just going to add more water to that mix so that as it goes near the bottom, it gets lighter and lighter. Okay, so you can see I'm just keeping it moving in that top sky so we don't get those lines. And then even more, I'm going to add even more water to that now, so that as we're coming down the bottom, it's still, you know, it's still we haven't got like any stripy marks. It keeps you, you know, it keeps your sky working. There we go. And then, you know, whilst that's drying, start to think about mixing up your other colours and everything. And of course, if you did want it, if you thought, oh, I don't want it a bit darker, it's not quite the colour I anticipated, you can always pop a bit of pigment just back in whilst it's still wet, you know, and just drop it in. Just got to be careful not to scrub it up though at this point. Sometimes you do, don't you? Like the corners, or sometimes it's just slightly. So I might go onto a bit more of a round brush then and just kind of bring it in a bit, but make sure it's kept moving. Yeah, so we're just kind of playing with that really. Right, here we go. So I'm just going to leave that alone now because I'm faffing. So yeah, so we're getting that nice wash in there, and you can do that like across all of it. So I'm going to now look at like what kind of lightest colour I might go in with this stonework, and it's difficult deciding. So I'm not going to put in the foliage at the back because that's, you know, a lot of it's darker. So I'm just going to go for these lightest bits on here. So you could try, this is where you can, people say, you know, what do I do with the white in it? Well, you can use the white in your colours if you want to get a bit more pastel-y. So I'm going to look at using a bit of white. Let's bring this forward a little. Try a bit of ochre in there, and that's quite warm, so I might only add warm highlights. So I'm going to pop a bit more of this white in here. And then a stony colour, you can even try and go in with a bit of a blue colour. That can make it a little bit more, you know, like some of these areas are a little bit more stony coloured. It's quite cool, isn't it? Whereas the actual castle is a bit warmer. So I'm going to go just test that first with my base colour. Tester. I want it quite light because I'm going to add into it. So I'm quite happy to go in with that colour, although I may even just what we've got here. Just adding a touch more blue actually to this. And again, it's just making sure once you've got your colour that you've got enough of it. Right, I'm going to go in with this colour because it's a little bit less bright than this here. So this is where all these, I can go in with them wherever I can see these little bits of rock. Not really making any shape with them at the moment, just kind of getting into place where I think they are. And I know that I've got kind of the lighter ones in then. What we still need when we're doing a watercolour anyway is getting that contrast in there, because it's the contrast that will give us the understanding of the depth, because it's a landscape still, or the distance between two things. So we still need that contrast. It doesn't need to be all like really light watercolory colour, if that makes sense. Sometimes we get a bit lost in that and think, oh, it's got to be all watery, but actually it doesn't. So just adding a bit more. Make sure I've got plenty mixed up because I've just run out a little bit of that same colour. But yeah, I mean, test out and just use what colour you prefer. So it's a bit lighter on this side and a bit kind of darker up there. So I'm going to go in with this just, and it doesn't matter if this overlaps the sky, because the sky's probably nearly dry, and also it's not it's already quite a muddyish tone, so it's not going to make it any worse, the rocks. And then I'm just going to warm it up slightly over this edge with a bit more, just have a bit of ochre colour in there. And you can always leave a little few gaps between it to get some like highlights in there. You can see like you get this white stone there. You can always kind of just work around that so that you've got one section where there's definitely more white. There you go. It's really enjoyable. You get really kind of sucked into the process of this, and then you know, we can think about the castle as well, what colour that might be. So that's even paler, isn't it? It's not white, but it's not far off. It's very pale. So just go with a really, really pale one to start with. It's almost a bit grey, isn't it? Just a tiny bit. So I'm just going to go in with, again, I'm trying a bit of blue in that, but making it have more like white in it than anything. And it won't give them a perfect white, it will just actually tone down the colour. So obviously this side and that side are two different sides altogether, aren't they? I'm going to go in here like that with that. Bring that colour in. You can do this on any building. So if you've got the one with the red roofs, you can just look at the tones of those roofs. Totally. It's really nice though, is it? Just getting really sucked into moving that water, pulling it all around the page. It's lovely. Just going to pop in a few bits, and I'm going to darken this further once I get to doing it. I mean, probably it's not picking up on the camera very well, probably, but it's actually like it is all a different shade in there. And I'm happy for that to dry because I'll just work in with the darker colours, but you can go in then if you wanted it. If you wanted to let it kind of splay out a little bit, you could go in. I'm just going to go in with a bit of an ochre colour. You could if you wanted. You know, start to bring in some of these while they're wet. I'm keeping all my lines a little bit wiggly because I want to keep it a little bit looser. So my lines aren't really straight, there's kind of little gaps between them. But this is just like, you know, letting it kind of splay out a little bit where you think you want those colours to run when it's a bit damper, or you can just totally let it dry and not do that. I can even kind of wiggle my brush so that we get a sense of some of the brickwork on there. It's just a bit more yellowy down here. To me, it looks like that anyway. But where we start to look at those colours and things that we can see. So I'm just moving that in whilst it's still a bit damp, so I can like pull the paint around a little bit. And I'm just going to leave that as it is for the moment, and I'm going to go on to my grass and get some of that colour in the grass as well. So I want my light colour greens in there. And again, when you're looking at, obviously when we're looking at greens, you've got to decide, is it yellowy green? Is it a cool green? Is it an emeraldy green? You know, what colour is it? A leafy green? And if you haven't quite got the right shade, then obviously we can add like that one there. That one's a bit of a different colour. I can add yellows to that as well to make it brighter. In fact, that one, I'm going to test it on here. Yeah, it's quite light, but it's not quite as light as I want it, because I want to go in with the lightest first. So I'm actually just going to add a bit of yellow for that to warm it up a little bit. And again, you can try different yellows on there. So yeah, so just popping those in, and if there's any gaps where it's very light, just leave, you know, you can just leave those as well. So I'm kind of working between at the moment, getting those lighter pictures in, and there's some even lighter ones actually on the look there, so I might actually just take a bit of that. And then just add a little bit of white in there to lighten it up even more. So I'm just going to go for those really light patches. There we go, that's a bit better. Get those really light ones in. For whatever foliage you've got, you know, just go for that light one, get it into place. Okay, and then again, if you're wanting to work into it, around, bringing in some of those other greens whilst it's still wet, so it blends, you know, so it's a bit more blended. Then, you know, by all means pull some of that in when it's wet. And if you don't, you want to let it dry, that again, not a problem. We're just looking at the different tones and getting that nice contrast. That's what helps. It really helps with our watercolor. So we can still keep it nice and loose and just kind of move the color across. But we still do need some level of contrast in there so it works. And we'll get more in as we go. And then obviously, you know, if there's any other areas of foliage that are much darker, you've got to really look, but you see where your darkest areas of then you can just add a darker, you know, a darker green, just see what you've got. I'm just like looking at what colour that might be. So, you know, you can expect, you know, so again, it'll be to do with how big you want that contrast as well. You might not want it too big or too bright. That's quite bright, so I need to go and get a slightly darker tone. That's better. Feels better now. So I'm just going to go in that was a bit bluey green for me. Wasn't keen on the, and again, you know, you don't know till you pop it on whether you're going to be keen on the contrast or not. So I'm just moving that in a little bit whilst it's wet, so it's a bit more blendy. Just in key areas. We get a sense, don't we, that there's almost, you know, kind of, it's very short, this glass, where it's been you know, someone's been caring for it and knowing it. If you put too much on, I've just done it there, look. Pop it out with a little bit of a tissue or a clean brush as well. And you can use things like little sponges and stuff on it anyway. So I'm just going to take a pause at this point and see how everybody's getting on with it. Right, so we're just kind of working into these areas a little bit more, and we go darker and darker as we go along. You know, and so it depends where you want to start with. I think I'm going to just finish off my castle a little bit. So, and again, you can work with using the same brush if you want to keep it looser, or you can go in with a smaller brush if you want to put it more tightly. So I might do a bit of a combination, but what I'm going to work on now is some of these other shadows that I can see, because this is obviously quite dark up here and around there. I don't know if that's even, might even be, it's almost a bit like some foliage, but it's not. I think it's just dark. But I'm going to just look at this, the difference between that and that, and deciding on the tones. So we'll make it more blue based, because again, we know blues and things disappear, don't they, into the background. So I'm also going to go in with some ochre again, just so we've got this kind of stone effect. And I may even go with a very, very tiny touch of like a peachy colour. Just a very small glow in there I can see of. It's almost a bit pinky, but I might have gone too far. I'll just check now, see what that looks like. Underneath. That is too warm. I'm just going to pull it off again with a bit more blue. And then what we can do, because obviously there is some lighter areas in there as well, but kind of go in and just work in like it's particularly dark around this pillar and down here. So I do want that contrast in a bit there. Putting those colours in. Around the base here as well. The inside of it's lighter, but as you're going round. And then obviously this top bit is even darker, so I'm just going to skirt round that a moment. I'm working on this particular bit here. So all I'm going to do there is start to just move this in and out a little bit as though it's a bit of brickwork, but without just kind of a suggestion. It's to drop in patches, just leave a little bit of lightness in there. And again, you know, I'm going really loose here. So you could go in much more detail if you wanted to. So what I want to do now is I want to go in even darker in these much darker areas here. So if you're not sure exactly what colour you want it to be, I'm dropping some brown as well. Might be a bit too warm that. I'm dropping a bit more blue. Okay, there we go. If you're not sure, build it up slowly. So if it's not, you know, like I'm looking now, I'm thinking that's not dark enough actually. I'm going to have to darken that off, but it'll be fine up here. I'm going to darken it again. So we're going in with these really dark tones and just popping them in place. And we know the shadows because we can see them overlapping. We can also avoid the light parts by creating that structure around it. And, you know, we're just darkening off some of these areas really. I'm going to wait till this is a bit dry and make that darker. But if there's anywhere else, I think, yeah, I'm going to make, you know, I'm going to go in with a dark colour again. Just that's what we're doing. We're kind of popping in those contrasts a little bit more. And then I can use some of these colours to kind of create the shape in here, where it's a little bit darker as well. Usually at the side, isn't it, of the on the shadow side of, you know, where you get these shadows on the side of the walls and everything. And then popping them in, just enjoying it. Where else can we see? So yeah, so wherever you're looking on here and you're thinking, yeah, there's a bit more, definitely a bit darker here, definitely a bit darker there, just pop them in, building up those lovely tones and colours. And you can be a sense that, you know, a sense of the shape. It doesn't need to be really highly accurate. And then we're dropping in these really dark colours for the windows and stuff. You know, where we know there's a real depth of shadow in there. And then obviously that's when we start to see a difference in the contrast of some of the things on the castle. You can drop even darker ones in if it's not quite dark enough. Just working my way through, and again, you know, you can start to go in with some of your shadows and things, and like, look, you know, pop in some of the, a bit of the shape and everything in. I mean, that might be a little bit too dark actually. And pull that off. It doesn't want to be quite as dark. I don't want it to be as dark as the rest of it, so I'm just gonna go in for a slightly lighter shadow. But we're kind of getting a sense here just by pulling across where we can see some of this, you know, some of these slates and rocks. Just pulling them at an ad hoc angle. It doesn't even have to be really specific. We just get kind of patches of them, so we can just replicate a kind of a pattern where we see them most. And it's just enough to suggest that there is, you know, this texture in the stone and everything as we go. That's it really. It doesn't really need to be overly complex, but then again, we can start to think about adding more contrast still if you want to. You can keep it there, you don't have to put any more in than there. You can actually then go in with just with your pen. Or if you feel that you want to add more contrast, not quite enough for you, then this is where you can like darken off. That's why I'm going to go in with this little section there. You know, where it gets a bit deeper in this stone, I'm going to add a little bit around there. So that's what I mean about, you know, darkening, making some of these contrasts darker if you want to. But again, you won't know if that's your, if you're wanting that until you do it. It's difficult sometimes to decide if the contrast is the right level for you or not. But I'm just going to kind of keep that loose enough there. So I'm not going to put too much more in until I do my pen. and then start to work on some of these areas like with the foliage and things like that as well. So I'd like to get some of that foliage in the background before I kind of do the stone work around it here. So it's just thinking again about, you know, what colour greens have you got, what dark colours and what light colours. So you can go in obviously with your lighter colours. Is it yellowy green? I would probably go in with those yellowy green colours to start with, just to kind of patch them up. Just so we've got them. And then, you know, you can see them around if you get those kinds of patterns and just kind of blob them on. Oops, bit blobbing that one up full stop. So it's not always, you can't always see what it is. Just dropping these colours in. Those in. Yeah. And then again, you know, we can start to choose some tones, some darker tones or whatever with the foliage to represent that. The other colours in there, the darker colours. So you might need to go through your box if you've got several greens and just give it a test. I'm just going to mix in this over here. I am going to test these colours because I'm not altogether sure. And go in a bit more. Okay. Darker, but it's not quite dark enough. So I need to load up the pigment. That's the other thing. Sometimes we forget to load that pigment up on our brush to get a more in-depth colour. So, you know, just start to kind of drop some of that foliage in amongst it. And where it's particularly dark, etc. A bit more on. Makes it nice and fun. You can keep it nice and loose with your brush, or you can, you know, really draw it in there. And I'm just improvising it. It's not exactly as this picture is, but I'm just going to, sometimes you can just leave out foliage at full stop if you don't want it in, or something else out. But as long as we've got this contrast, that's how we get like the feel that these trees are 3D and everything. And again, we're just dropping it in. And we can go in with some even darker colours once we've kind of got that, and go in and, you know, make that more watery as well. So we're just going through it, you know, it's a bit of a process, isn't it, really? So then I'd be looking, you know, down the bottom. Do you get a really dark shadow cast in there? I'm looking for a really dark green. I think I'm going to have to just turn the light on in here. It's getting really dark. So just go with me. This will change the look of it again. I've just got a bright light on there. Okay, so I'll just put my paints forward so I can see them a bit better. So you might even end up adding like a brown one into the mix to darken off. That's very dark green actually. Use that one. And then, you know, it might be too wet, so this is where you have to make a decision whether you're just going to drop it in and leave it to, which I'm going to do actually, quite liking the effect of that. It is very, very damp, but you just get quite a nice natural effect sometimes when you do it. But yeah, to get that contrast, certainly between the trees, at the base, you know, underneath the rocks. Again, between those trees to separate them out. And then wherever else you can see that you need to pop a bit more depth in there. Good fun though, isn't it? Lovely fun to drop these dark colours in. And just as we go, you know. There we go. And then, you know, you can decide to leave it, or you can come back when it's a bit more dry and pop in a bit more definition. It's entirely up to you. So we're just working through with an entire process like that, really. I'm just looking on there. I want to just add a tiny bit more brickwork on here. Bring that right down. You know, we're just darkening any areas, softening it down, etc. And then, you know, exactly the same. We can start looking at the brickwork and do the same to it. Or you can even work into some of the areas if you want to start working with your pen. And again, this sort of thing about you can do it whilst it's damp if you want to or not. I'm going to go in with my pen at the end actually because I prefer to do it that way. But you can start making a few little wiggly marks and things in there. And you know, you can go right into detail and put lots of linear things in, or you can just pop a few little lines in where you've got things, which is what I'm going to do actually. So I'm just going to take these rocky areas now and start to look at the ones particularly at the back. So I'm going to make these quite bluey. There's the dark shadows on them, so they do kind of sink in a bit. And then again, you can see somewhere some of those shadows are. Some of these, and just use your brush to kind of create almost these different stepped shapes in there. Same at the back, you know, we don't get too much definite, you know, we don't get too much idea of what's going on there, but we get a bit. So, you know, we don't need to put too much detail in there at the back, but it just comes together bit by bit on a watercolor. It's really nice how it emerges. And again, you know, working forwards, looking at these lovely rocks and things in here, you know, looking at, you can leave the light, you know, just work around the light bits that you've already got in, that you've put the tone down. Get some of these, you know, slightly different shapes that we can see in there. Like that. And then the same, you know, some of these ones at the front here. You just get different, I mean, and again, I'm not doing perfect shapes, I'm just going to get in a sense of them, really. Just wiggling those in, and then again, you know, going in with a nice dark one in there. You know, and I could have just gone and washed this and really put very little in, but again, like I said, you just put in as much or as little detail as you want and you feel that your style wants to pop in. Difficult to go against it. It's nice to try it, but then it's also nice to go with what you know you really like as well. For sure. I'm just going to pop in the really dark ones there. Anything else that's quite dark. You know, between the bigger rocks or whatever, you get some dark ones, don't you? Popping those in. Yeah, so we're getting all these bits and pieces in that we want there. If you want to, again, you know, it's like if you want to pop anything else into your grass, any other colours, you think, oh, I've not got that quite, I'm going to deepen that or whatever, you can start to add those over. Particularly now you've got your darker colours in, you might think, oh, there's a few I want to add contrast of the grass. You might think I'm going to be bold because I've got some of the other foliage in that I really like. I'm going to just darken this area off or whatever. So yeah, feel free to do that as well. Good fun. I'm just going to pull a few through here. Just kind of darken it off a little bit because I'm quite happy to. There we go. And then obviously you've got this lovely foliage over here where you've got these purples and everything. And again, it's like looking at how you use this base to try and get some of those rock shapes and things in. So you could mix up, I'd probably get some warm colours. So I'm going to go for some, there are some quite ochre colours in there. So I'm just going to go where I think that I can see some of these ochre colours. And I'm not exactly sure. I think maybe the stonework, it sometimes feels a bit like that's a bit warmer. So I'm going to look like it to start with. I'm just going to go where I think with it. It was a bit warmer. Dropping in a few where it feels slightly warmer. And it's, you know, sometimes if it's proving too difficult, if it feels like there's just too much, then just drop it in ad hoc. Find it works as it naturally occurs like that. And then obviously it's like looking at like the stonework, the next level up of it's a bit browny actually, I'd say. So a bit ochre, it's kind of ochre but grey. So I'm going to go for a grey ochre colour like that. So it's a bit more warm than these stones over here. And then all I'm going to do is just create just some little rock shapes. I'm not going to go spend hours doing it. I'm just going to do a suggestion that there's these ones in here. And it might feel a bit like, oh, what am I doing? I'm just letting go of all this. That's okay. Because we can add once we start to add the contrast in between the rocks and everything, it just makes a bit more sense. So I'm almost filling in a few of these gaps here. I'm just leaving a few but bare. You do get some pattern to it, don't you? So they're lined up a little bit. I'm going to go up to kind of where the foliage I think it is, and then I'm not going to darken those until I've got this purple foliage in. So there are some quite darker areas in there I'm going to drop in, but I'm just going to have a little look at this purple foliage and then get those in. So I have to have a little look at the purples that you've got. This will be a good one to try out, because obviously if it's a warmer purple, we might need to add a drop of blue to it, and if it's a cooler purple, you might need to warm it up depending on the shade. See, that's quite warm, that one. I don't really want that one. It's got a lot of red in it, whereas the other one, I'm happy with that on the paper. See how that goes. Yeah, it's still darkish, but it'll be fine. And then you can always try a bit of pinky in there as well if it's a bit lighter. You can even try a tiny bit with white in it and see what happens if it's too dark. So you can always thin it down. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to get all these shapes in there. I think the key for me is just spinning what I've got down slightly. So I did say I was going to work quite loosely tonight, so I am going in and just dropping in some shapes. Over the top, and then I'm going to drop shadows between them as well. Just want to make sure I've got the colour that I want, and just leave a few lighter areas because we can go in with a darker colour of this as well. And then up the top there's a little bit. So whatever you're doing, just dropping in these lovely colours works really, really nicely, doesn't it? We haven't even got onto the pen, have we? Just thought about that, but take a pause in a moment. See how everyone's getting on whilst this is actually drying off. I'm going to dry mine off. Yeah. Take a pause. Let that dry a bit because I can't do much until it's, I don't want to do too much till it's dry, just so I can get some shadows in. Pause there. Okay, so you know when you're doing this little bit on here, it's just thinking then about getting some of those, you know, the shadows between what colours you're going to go for and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to drop those in fairly quickly, and then we'll just have a little go on getting some of that, some of the pen in as well. So you don't have to go as dark as this, by the way. You can even go in with some kind of greeny colours as well if you want to. You decide what colours you want the shadows within your things to be. It just helps a little bit with the flowers of getting it, you know, getting the depth in there. And then obviously you can also just go in with a different colour for the flowers if you want him to go in with a slightly pinker one or whatever. Just drop another colour in there. Sometimes it just kind of pops it out a little bit. I'm going to let those dark patches just dry off though, because they're actually really damp. And if I pop any pink, a lot of pink around it, it will really start to kind of mix in with it. I'll come away from that for a minute. So yeah, so I would just start to drop in that we haven't got the very darkest ones in there, have we, like these shadows underneath the stones. So that's kind of something you can be thinking about popping in. And and how deep that shadow is. And you might only want to pop a very small amount in certain places, because they're not all really dark, are they? But it just, again, it can just, that's quite a deep one. It can just create that depth that you're looking for underneath those stones that jut out a little bit. I'll start to drop those. So you've got the same depth with the shadows and everything that you have in there, but you're still kind of creating it nice and loosely, really. And that, you can just pop those in wherever they need to go without it being too harsh. Just carefully select whereabouts you can put your darkest in. So once you've kind of worked your way around that, it's thinking about how you're going to use your pen. So sometimes if you're not altogether sure, have a little practice on your paper about how much of the lines you want to use, just setting yourself up for a bit of success, really. Yeah. So well, I've just got a little fine liner, and this is really down to, like, as we said before, sometimes people like to pop it on before. So if you've gone really kind of quite sketchy and you want to keep it quite sketchy, then there's no you certainly don't have to start going and making really straight lines, which is what I'm not going to do. What I'm going to do is just pick out key areas that I want to kind of get a bit more of this sketchy kind of pen feel. So I'm gonna, like you can see, I'm just making this slightly sketchy, almost like this is. I'm just going to pick out key areas that I'm just going to like almost highlight with the pen. But you can do lots of it if you're really enjoying using that pen over the top and you want it to kind of have, you know, have more of a linear feel, you can. But I'm actually using it a little bit like I would a sketching pencil here, look, because I like the sketchiness of the looseness of the way that I've got it. So I'm just going to add in, even over like my shadows here, I'm just adding a little bit of you know, a little bit of the fun in the shape in it and everything. So it's, and you don't even have to like use it just for shadows, but you also can. So I'm not like drawing a hard edge. You can draw a hard edge, so I'm not saying at all that you can't, but I'm just using mine a little bit more in keeping with what I've got going on here. So I'm just gonna just wiggle this. And you know, you can just start to add a few. I'm adding a few sketchy bits up the side here over the top. But it is very wiggly, very sketchy. But you don't, as I said, just have a test. If you're not sure, draw something on with a, you know, on here, and then you can decide, do I want a nice thick line on it or not? But a lot of it's down to the style that you're going to use or develop. This is why I said you don't always know to start with what that's going to look like, but you need to start somewhere and just have a little go, really. So yeah, so I'm just kind of working around this top bit a bit and I'm putting a bit more definition, but as I said, just sketching it away. And I might even work into some of these bushes and just use this very sketchy feel. You can even put like, get trunks in there if you can see any. You know, you can use it to even just enhance some of your foliage. So you won't really know until you sometimes when you start going, your hand starts moving. You know, I've said this before, and it is true. The hand starts moving, and that just gives you a little bit of a feel about how you want to get things in. And again, you know, you can just use it sparingly in places, or you can use as much as you want. So I'm quite happy with what I've got going on there. I'm just going to add a little bit to this here. It's very sketchily. And again, I'm going to add some of these sketchy wheels into this wall here, up there. Maybe just get some definition on the top of this wall. But again, I'm breaking these lines up so that, you know, they really are kind of squiggly. And the edge, and pop some on the edge of that castle up there. Quite squiggly mine actually, but you don't realise until you start doing it how, you know, how individual we are with what way we do things. But yeah, I'm just going to continue with this similar style. I think that's the thing. Once you have a style with it, maybe kind of stick with it so that there's a bit of balance in there. So whatever it looks like, just have fun with it, really. You know, it's not often we get to kind of sketch on the top of stuff, is it? But like I said, some people will actually, you know, like if you've got a row of buildings, will actually be really quite neat with it. And other people like me will be a bit more sporadic with it. So, and a bit looser. So until you've had a go, you're not necessarily going to know what is, you know, what it is that you like to see, because you might do something you think, I just don't like that at all. And then that's your cue to do it a different way. Or you might think, oh, I love this, just do it more. So yeah, so I'm just really loosely getting in with that, popping these kind of edges on, and then I'll do the same with the rocks. So I'm not going to go into like a massive amount of detail. I'm going to kind of get some of the edges of these rocks in there, just to make it a little bit more natural, because it's got a little bit linear around this edge. Yeah, and that's what we're doing. We're just literally using our pen how we feel like. So I'm just going to use it for getting a little bit of sketchy definition in there. Nothing too much. Yeah. Just however you feel like doing it. And even, you know, where you've got your foliage, you can even, you know, use it within there if you want to. You know, you can even do kind of where you get a few little kind of bunches of them, you can kind of just go in and see what, it's really just about experimenting within it and see what happens, really. You know, you can add more colour on there anyway. And that's it, really. It's just it's quite an experimental thing when you're popping it on. Like obviously mine is super sketchy over the top, so I want to keep it a bit more looser. But as I said, you can just have a go, and you might do another one, and it's really kind of tight and accurate and very linear, and then you might do another one. It's very loose. So you know, it's as much about experimenting with mark making, I'd say, when you're doing pen and wash. And as little or as much. So some you might put more pen, some you might put even less on. just to kind of tighten up some of those little areas. But I would say, you know, just enjoy really, because it's a fab thing to have a go at. And then you can always come back to it in the morning and think, do I want to add anything? You know, if you wanted to soften down some of these lines, you can actually pop a little bit whilst it's damp, you know, pop a little tiny bit of water on. I'm not going to, because I don't really like, I don't want the effect on there. I wanted to keep the squiggles, but you know, you can experiment with that as well. You can always pop, you know, pop a bit over the top of something like that to try it, you know, and then you get this, sometimes you get this kind of really soft effect, you know, just pour a little bit of water through it. So you can try that as well. But yeah, it's interesting, and I hope that's been helpful for you.